Episode 5, A New Mission. After crossing the A2 area, they arrived at Area C. Compared to A2, the weather was much worse. Caleb could vaguely see a blood-colored mist drifting in the air. On the way, the three of them met two other groups of Alpha hunters who had received the news. They fell into line behind the black Tango tank, leading the way. The Tango was a heavy mobile weapon with a large caliber gun and heavy armor plating. The closer they got to the target area, the more Alpha hunters gathered. About half an hour later, Caleb and the others numbered 10 Alpha hunter teams. There were even 2 teams with at least one level 3 hunter. Just as everyone was carefully wiping their guns and preparing their ammunition, a huge red light beam shot up into the sky about 3 kilometers ahead. The red light illuminated the darkness and broke through the dark clouds. Then there was an extremely loud sonic wave. Fortunately, the vehicle had a soundproofing system. Otherwise, Caleb and the others would have gone deaf. The sound grew increasingly louder until it forced everyone in the vehicle to put on their helmets to block the noise. Semi-broken walls were completely shattered by the sound wave, and there were even some pillars mixed in with human bones that smashed into the AMA, causing it to shudder. Crystal was unafraid. Inside her helmet, her bright eyes shone. "Now we're having fun," she said with a smile. Crazy woman, Caleb thought. The sound wave only lasted for a few more moments before it was quiet again. However, Caleb could still see some light flashing in the distance. Now, gunshots were heard. There were also electromagnetic cannons firing in the distance. About 1 kilometer away from the battlefield, the black tank in front suddenly stopped. "Everyone out!" a voice shouted into the radio. "Let's go!" Everyone got out, and Caleb checked his rifle and magazines. It was dark as midnight, so they turned on the night vision device on their helmets. Once on, the scenery in front of them was bright as day. Caleb followed closely behind Warren, heading toward the hunters who were gathering near the tank. As they drew closer, Caleb saw there was a commander dressed in a black uniform that could vaguely be seen. He gathered everyone and established a chain of command. Then he began a briefing for those who were gathered. "Up ahead is the Insect King, produced by the Red Tide. And this time there's no bombing. The higher-ups have requested we obtain the Insect King's core, and your other missions have been canceled." There was a collection of groans from the hunters as they saw their efforts wasted on their respective missions. "Before you get mad, listen up," the commander continued. "When we succeed, the military will automatically give you 3 times the pay rate for your corresponding missions." The groans changed to cheers as the hunters realized what was now at stake. Caleb was naturally very happy when he heard this. 3 times the reward meant that the $10,000 he was expecting was going to be $30,000 after the completion of the new mission. Not only would he be able to treat his sister, but he would also be able to buy better gear and other things they needed. After the commander finished speaking, he led the group forward slowly. Including Caleb and his team, there were about 40 hunters in the group. Judging by their gear, most of them were level 1 hunters. There were only a few intermediate hunters among the teams. Caleb hoped it would be enough. Together, they made their way toward the hot zone. Judging from the layout of the target location, it was a bustling part of the city before the nuclear blast toppled some of the old buildings. They had made good progress and could now see the origin point where the red column of light came from. It was about 2 blocks away. The teams were moving forward carefully when a gunshot suddenly rang out from the front of the column of troops. Everyone took cover, including Caleb. Hearing nothing further, he stayed behind cover and kept an eye on his surroundings. Soon, one of the hunters in the lead was openly berating another. Caleb watched, noticing that the younger hunter wore gear that was very similar to his own. Everyone's eyes stared at the level 1 hunter who was on the receiving end of the lecture. Word spread quickly of what had happened. An inexperienced hunter had accidentally fired his rifle into the ground when he left his finger on the trigger. Quiet chatter around them indicated that the Level 1 hunter's name was Smith. This was Smith's first mission. He was a rich second-generation kid from western Oakland. The other hunters looked at Smith with disdain. Then, as they watched, Smith's teammates angrily snatched his rifle away and put the safety back on, before handing it back to him. They couldn't afford these kinds of accidents, as it could draw the creatures to their location. When the incident settled, the teams turned to continue their trek along the ruined road into the city. But at that very moment, the house behind the lead team suddenly collapsed. A huge mutated creature emerged and swallowed Smith and everyone on his team. Everyone reacted, aiming at the huge mutated bug. One hunter shouted, "It's a giant! Why didn't we see it on the radar?" Another answered, "Radar's useless in the red tide. Get your head down and start shooting." The military officers quickly opened fire as they tried to maneuver the tank into position. Hunters near the creatures scattered in every direction, seeking cover and concealment. Crystal pushed Caleb out of the way, took out her handgun, and began firing at the beast. Caleb wasn't in a good position to offer support fire. He tried to stay out of the way as Crystal and several other hunters engaged the creature. A crackling light lit up the area as one of the military officers fired the electromagnetic cannon. In the blink of an eye, the armor-piercing rounds found their mark, shredding the tough outer skin of the beast. It staggered, and Caleb began to think they had won the battle. But as he watched, the beast recovered. It had only been stunned, not defeated. The beast reached out its big hand and raised it into the sky. "Run!" Warren shouted in his ear. Caleb had no idea what the beast was going to do, but he didn't want to wait to find out. They all ran as fast as they could. Caleb kept his finger off the trigger of the rifle, thinking about Smith and how he didn't survive his first mission, along with all of his team. Crystal brought up the rear with one hand on Caleb's shoulder and the other firing from the hip as she tried to keep up. Caleb ran desperately, keeping his eyes on Warren's ungainly form as it moved through the mist. Then a loud sound came from behind them. "Get down!" Crystal shouted, pushing Caleb into a hole behind some rubble. The strong shockwave pushed the surrounding, partially collapsed buildings flat. As Caleb watched, many of the hunters were knocked down and buried under the broken walls. Luckily, Caleb and his team were fast. They had found a low spot in the road, partially covered by debris, and hunkered down in time. Otherwise, they would have been buried, perhaps for good. "Move now!" Crystal barked. Warren and Caleb obeyed, dredging themselves up from the dusty hole that saved their lives and continuing their retreat towards safety. Caleb's heart was beating fast. He took a glance backward, but the dust was too thick to see. Sounds emerged from the gloom. He swung the rifle around on its strap to rest across his back to keep his body moving forward quickly. The rumbling footsteps behind him sounded like they were getting closer. Every step brought Caleb closer to a feeling of panic. Warren had vanished from Caleb's line of sight. Crystal stopped looking back and was running as fast as she could. "Where are we going?" Caleb breathed heavily. "Back to the rally point," Crystal answered. They had to return to the rally point to get their armored vehicle. But why there? Caleb wondered. How would that help? He didn't have time to ask. Crystal slowed, gesturing for a break, and they pushed themselves into a tight space that looked like a collapsed parking garage. Using her helmet communications unit, she spoke in quick jargon, trying to reach anyone who was still alive. Caleb heard the transmission through his helmet, with intermittent interference clouding the transmission. From what he could tell, Crystal was in contact with an experienced hunter who was at the rally point. They made a quick plan, using the AMA. They would lure the beast away from the rally point and back to the battlefield. Crystal confirmed the hunter's location near the parked AMAs. "Are you alone?" she wheezed into the microphone.
"Negative,"
the hunter answered.
"We have numbers here. Continue your retreat. I'll brief you en route."
Caleb breathed a sigh of relief, and Crystal turned off her mic and they lurched forward toward the rally point. As they ran, the hunter shared intelligence about what was known to the team. This particular beast was larger than any Caleb had seen. Even as the pursuit of the creature grew less intense, Caleb did not dare look back. At this moment, he was thinking about his sister Daisy. She was the reason he was here in the first place. She needed him. He absolutely could not die here. Absolutely not. With this thought in mind, Caleb redoubled his efforts, and they soon reached the rally point. He ran to their vehicle and climbed into the driver's seat, starting the engine. Warren was already there, breathing heavily in the back seat. Crystal was hunched over about half a block behind, trying to catch her breath.
"Glad you could make it,"
Warren said by a way of greeting. Caleb didn't have time to answer. Caleb stepped on the accelerator, and the armored vehicle drove forward, braking to a stop beside Crystal.
"Get in!"
Caleb swung open the door before he even stopped. The wind rushed in like a thief in the night. She unlatched the door and heaved herself inside.